scissors, paper, shoot. Frindle writes on paper, I won.
What in the world is a frindle?
Is a frindle mightier than a sword?
If you want to know what a frindle is, and maybe even a weaver, stay tuned.
The following is a presentation of the Fairfax Network.
Frindle? Weber? A frindle is a pen, of course, but the word only makes sense if you've read one of Andrew Clements' more popular books called, you guessed it, Frindle. Hello, and welcome to the show. My name is Della Kidd. Have you ever thought of your teachers as anything other than, well, a teacher? Teachers are moms and dads, artists and pilots, even authors. My next guest is Andrew Clements. He used to be a public school teacher, but now spends his time writing books for young people. In addition to Frindle, he has written Big Al, a personal favorite, The Landry News, and Janitor's Boy. Now, let's meet the author. Andrew, I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Well, it's a great pleasure for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any one book or chapter from Frindle, Landry News, Janitor's Boy reflect your own experiences?
Well, it's almost fair to say that they all do. I think as a writer, the more I do it, the more I discover that what I'm really doing is mining my own life in the same way that a gold miner will dig away and find things that are buried within. You look back over your own life and once in a while things jump out and say, this is an idea for a story.
Can you give an example of perhaps when one of your own children were helped to give you a story idea or participate as a character in one of your books?
Well, I don't know that that really happens specifically, but the things that they do, the things that they say, the things that their friends say and do, children I've met as a teacher, the years that I spent as a teacher, all those things kind of get blended in. I really can't think of a particular incident that one of my kids did that has made its way exactly that way into a story. But it all kind of blends together.
Well, let's switch gears for just a minute. How do you begin to organize your ideas as you begin to write a book?
Well, the idea comes first. It really has, something has to kind of grab hold of you and say, this is a good idea. And a big part of writing is learning to just recognize ideas when they kind of bang you over the head. And I could show you something. During the first few years when I really started working at being a writer full-time, just spending more and more time at it, this is a list of stories that I started to write. Now, if you double-clicked on some of these, it's a pretty long list, don't you think?
It sure is.
If you double-clicked on some of these on my computer, you would open up and you wouldn't see a complete story. You'd see a sentence or two, you'd see maybe a paragraph or even a page or two, but none of these are really finished. During this same period of time, this is the list of stories that I actually finished writing. So an idea that started out over here, I got really interested. I worked on it as long as I could, made it as good as I could possibly make it. And since I was trying to be a professional author and not just a writer, because anyone can be a writer, being an author means that you send your things out for someone to publish, turn it into a book. So I sent these stories plus some others out to publishers and said, what do you think? And during this same period of time, this little list over here on the end, these are the ones that actually were published as books. Now, if you were in math class, Della, what would you call this?
I would have to call that a bar graph.
You would have to call it a bar graph. You would be right. And the title up above this bar graph would be The Writer's Life, because that's what it's like. You're always looking for ideas. When you get an idea that really makes sense to you, that you're very interested in, you work on it till it's as good as you can make it. And then you send it to a publisher, a publishing company. And if you find the right editor on the right day at the right publishing company, then that publisher might say, we'd like this to be a book.
Now, when they accept those books, because what the editors accepted in your original list, there's a big difference between the length in the two. Do you go back and revisit those ideas?
Absolutely. I know that as a young writer, as a writer doing things, writing creative writing in school, I didn't like the revision process. I would say to my mom, Mom, it's good enough. I'm tired of this. I'm going to move on to something else.
Not many of us do.
Yeah, revision is the hard work of writing. And I could show you some things from the writing of Frindle. Would you like to?
Let's get to that in just a few minutes. That's fascinating, the way the progression of what you started off with and what's been published. Thank you. I talked to lots of kids about books written by Andrew Clements. A few of those questions are on tape, but before I roll the video, jot down this number so you can ask your own questions to Andrew Clements. Across the country, the number is 1-800-231-6359. Locally, call 703-978-1636. Okay, let the student questions begin.
Mr. Clements, how long did it take you to write the book Frindle?
How many times did you have to revise the Landry news?
In the Landry news, did you ever feel like the character Kara?
Do you read any other books for kids besides your own?
How long did it take you to write Temple Cat?
How did you think of the name Frindle to relate to the book?
Wow, lots of questions on revisions, favorite books as a kid, and Frindle. I personally would like to start with Frindle.
All right.
Where did you get the idea for Frindle? Where did you come up with the word for Frindle?
Appropriately enough, it happened when it was on one of the very first times I was visiting a school as a visiting author. It was back in 1989, right after I'd written the book Big Al. I was talking to a group of first and second graders in Littletown, Rhode Island, and a boy in the back of the class. See, if this boy had been absent that day, I would not have written this book. He raised his hand because I'd been talking about words and language. I had the big dictionary that I was showing them, all these 500,000 words, 500,000 words in this book, and a boy raised his hand and said, where did all the words in the dictionary come from? And I thought, and I said, well, the truth is that people made up all these words, because that is the truth about words. They all get made up. And he said, no way, people can't make up words. I said, no, it's really true. And in fact, and I pulled one of these out of my pocket, because I've always got one of these close by. I said, in fact, if today all of us said that from now on we will call this thing a Frindle, I just made it up on the spot, we're going to call this thing a Frindle. They giggled, they thought it sounded funny. I said, no, really, we're going to call this thing a Frindle. And if enough people start calling it a Frindle, one day it could be in the dictionary, because that's the way words get started. People notice a word, the people who make dictionaries notice people using new words, and they put them in the new dictionaries.
You have to wonder if those students remember that conversation.
I wonder too. I know the teacher does, because I've met her again. I met her again. And she said, you know, in my classroom, didn't you tell a story that was kind of like the book Frindle?
How about that?
Yeah.
Let's go to a picture of Mrs. Granger. She's Nick Allen's teacher in Frindle. And there's a picture of, there's this halo that says, use the dictionary overhead, that I absolutely love. What makes Mrs. Granger so real, so believable to your readers, as well as to you?
Well, Mrs. Granger, like most of the characters in my book, sometimes kids will say, did you have a teacher like Mrs. Granger? Not specifically. Mrs. Granger is a composite of, there's a little bit of me in there. I made my kids use the dictionary a lot when I was a teacher. Certainly some of the teachers that I had, other teachers that I've known and taught with. So she's kind of a blending of a lot of great teachers who love kids, who understand that really loving and caring about kids is the most important thing, and that's 99% of the teachers in the world. They do it out of love. And they love kids. They have to sometimes put on a stern face, because it's hard to get 20 or 30 kids moving in the same direction, learning, thinking, growing. And that's just, you know, what's so appealing about her is that you get to see more of who she really is as a person, I think. And I think many kids discover this, that when they get to know their teachers, more than just what they're doing as the teacher, they discover, wow, this is a really wonderful, deep...
There's a human there.
There's a real person here, yeah.
Well, Frindle, I know, was your first chapter book. Is it different writing that kind of book versus a picture book, which is what you had been used to writing?
It's very much different. At the point when I wrote Frindle, if I laid out all the books I've written in my life so far, you would notice that Frindle really is the first chapter book. Up until that point, from 1987 till 1996, I've been writing nothing but picture books, which are much shorter. You turn the pages 12 times and a picture book is over. A chapter book has to go on much longer, so you have more time to develop. But when I first got that idea in that classroom for this book, I kept telling that story to kids. And then one day, as I was sitting at home looking for that next idea, I thought, you know, how about that story I keep telling to kids about how you could make up your own word? Well, when I got that idea, I wrote a picture book.
And it was a picture book audience that you had been giving that idea to begin with.
I was thinking of myself as Andrew Clements, the picture book author.
Right.
That's how I thought of myself. So I wrote a picture book. It's called Nick's New Word, and it's only 3 pages long. And I thought it was a pretty good picture book, so, like some of these other stories I wrote, I sent it to a publisher. The publisher wrote back and said, Andrew, I like this idea. It's funny. I've never read a story like this. Kid makes up a new word. But I really think it ought to be a chapter book, don't you? And I said, no, I don't. And I took the story and sent it to a different publisher. 5 different editors all said the same thing. I like the idea, but it's the wrong size story. It's too big a story for a picture book, which is it's a small container in a picture book. So I finally did something which was, I wrote the longest thing I'd ever written. And this is the manuscript for Frindle that I wrote then. And this was longer than anything I'd written in high school or college or graduate school. And you see, on that subject of how things are long, I can show you the first page of the book Frindle. It looks like this. This is the first page of the book Frindle. And I could take those same words and put them on a piece of paper like this. This is also the first page of the book Frindle, and so is this.
So they're all saying the same thing, but formatted very differently.
Exactly the same words in a different shape. But this is the most surprising one here. This is the first page of the book Frindle. Ready for this one?
Oh my goodness.
This is the first page, and I can prove it because I'll read it to you here. Let me free it from...
That doesn't look like the first page in your
It doesn't look like a
book.
normal book. When I show this to librarians, it frightens them because they think, how would I ever shelve this properly? But anyway, Chapter 1, Nick. That's the title of the chapter. If you ask the kids and the teachers at Lincoln Elementary School to make 3 lists, all the really bad kids, all the really smart kids, and all the really good kids, Nick Allen would not be on any of them. Nick deserved a list all his own, and everyone knew it. Was Nick a troublemaker? Hard to say. One thing's for sure, Nick Allen had plenty of ideas, and he knew what to do with them. One time in 3rd grade, Nick decided to turn Miss Deaver's room into a tropical island. What kid in New Hampshire isn't ready for a little summer in February? So first he got everyone to make small palm trees out of green and brown construction paper and tape them onto the corners of each desk. Miss Granger had only been a teacher, Miss Deaver had only been a teacher for about 6 months, and she...
And we'll have to tune in. But Tanya's waiting for us. She's calling in
great.
from New Jersey. Tanya, what's your question today?
Yes, what inspired you to be a writer?
What inspired you to be a writer?
Tanya, the thing that I like best about being a writer, it really grew out of me being a reader. And when kids ask the question, what made you become a writer, it's really because I was a reader first. I learned what good writing sounds like and feels like. And the more good books you read, it's great preparation for being a writer.
Thank you very much, Tanya. We have another call in from Amy.
Okay.
Hi, Amy. What's your question today?
I wanted to know, how did you become an author? Like, how do you like it?
Okay. Those are kind of two questions. How did I become an author? Sort of what I told Tanya, by first of all reading a lot and then learning that I enjoyed writing myself. And what was the second part of the question?
How do you like it?
Do you like it?
Thank you. How do I like it? I like it a lot because I'm enjoying kind of exploring my own life, my own ideas, and putting those ideas into the stories. And when I'm not doing that, I get to come and talk to people like you. And what could be more fun than that?
Thanks, Amy. Like most teachers, I have a few tricks up my sleeve when it comes to word study, but I've never asked students to invent their own words until now. Let's see what one group of kids decided to create.
Our word is weaver.
We, burr. We has the stress. It's a noun. It's a thing.
A Weber is a writing of some length. One of my favorite Andrew Clements Webers is the Landry News.
I have to write my Weber report.
I have to check a recipe in my Cook Weber.
Welcome back to Meet the Author, an interactive distance learning program about the writing process. With me is children's author Andrew Clements. Andrew, how often do you revise your stories? Is your first draft your last draft?
No, certainly not. I held up earlier my first work on the book, Frindle, was this first draft. And when I did this, I thought I was done. And the publisher wrote me back and said, we're going to turn this into a book. And then all this happened. This was the next 3 months of work. We looked at the whole book 5 different times. You can kind of count the different, they're rubber banded together here. We looked at the whole manuscript 5 different times, and all these little sticky notes you see here on this side, and don't forget the ones over here, these are all the changes we made to the story to get it just right, to become the book that kids have been reading. And that same process sort of has to happen as well when they translate the book into other languages. They have to take the same, this is the book Frindle in Italian.
Explain that in just a minute. We have a call in from Brittany, and I don't want to keep her waiting.
That's
Brittany,
okay.
what's your question?
How many more books do you think you would like to write?
How many more books would you like to write?
That's a hard question. How many more would I like to write? Well, I don't think I'm going to stop anytime soon. That's kind of like asking, how long will you live? Well, I don't really have the answer to that question, but I think as long as I'm still breathing, as long as I'm able to sit up and do this on my computer screen, I'll probably keep writing books.
Thanks. Hi, we have another call in. This one is from Amy. Hi, Amy. What's your question?
In The Janitor's Boy, why did you give Jack such a great sense of smell?
I gave Jack such a great sense of smell in that book because it sort of goes along with the story, don't you think? The way he has to kind of trace things around by his nose, and how much he found that the smell of bubble gum.
That watermelon bubble gum.
The watermelon bubble gum. Boy, that Bubblicious is very strong stuff.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Amy. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Landry News. We're going to switch gears a minute. A student from Wakefield Forest wanted to know if you ever felt like Kara, who is the main character in that story. Is it possible for an author like yourself, you've had a lot of life experiences, you're a dad, to be able to feel like an 11-year-old girl, which is the main character in your story?
Well, that's one of those stories that grew out of my own experience as a teacher. The best teachers, I think, can look at a child and say, this is what that kid is like. I can tell what that child needs right now. It's like a mom or a dad, really. You see what your child needs. So I've seen girls in my classes like Kara, who are a little shy, who had a whole life of their own going on inside, but they didn't show it very much. You could tell if you looked carefully, but they didn't show it very much. So it's not that I was, that's what being an author really involves, is looking into someone else's life and seeing if you can figure out how they feel.
Why do you think Mr. Larson, who was such an unhappy teacher, why, at the beginning of the Landry News, why was he so unhappy in your mind?
Well, I think it's because teaching is a hard job. It takes a lot of hard work, and sometimes other things in your own life, like in Mr. Larson's life, he had some problems in his own personal life that kind of spilled over into his work. And it doesn't happen just to teachers, it happens to people in other jobs as well, where you kind of get burned out, get kind of tired. But teaching is a very demanding job when it's done well. And he was just one of those teachers who had worked too long, too hard.
Yeah. Well, Nick, who was the main character of Frindle, and Kara, who is the main character of Landry News, do you see commonalities among those two characters, or differences among them that you'd like to share with us?
Well, they're quite different. I think Nick is a lot more confident in a way. He started off that book kind of knowing that he was smart, knowing that he was able to do things, knowing that he was able to figure things out and make things happen. Kara had to discover those things. So that's one big difference between them, I think.
I like the formatting too. Each chapter, instead of it being titled, it looks like a headline from a newspaper.
Yes, well that was an idea that my editor had. When I sent it in, it had very different chapter titles, and she said, how about making them headlines? And she didn't offer to write them for me, but she said, why don't you go and do that? And that's what a good editor does, like a good teacher. They give you an idea and let you work with it.
And let you expand on it. Great. The Landry News highlights the story of a young journalist. Not too long ago, the crew of Meet the Author tracked a middle school reporter for the Bruin Times. Here's a slice of newspaper life at one Virginia school.
Part classroom, part newsroom. These 7th grade students are gathering information, checking facts, writing and filing stories for the next edition of the Bruin Times. The lead story? A glove drive for needy children in Kosovo, a country where U.S. servicemen are stationed. Reporter and editor-in-chief Sun-Young Chung has little to go on. To find out more, she seeks an interview with a student government representative.
Can you give me some background information on what's happening over there?
There's currently a really bloody civil war going on in Kosovo.
Who's sponsoring this project and who's in charge of it?
Mrs. Doyle is an 8th grade science teacher on the purple team, and her son is currently stationed in Kosovo. And he noticed last winter that children there don't have the proper clothing. And so her son wondered if she could sponsor a drive at Lake Braddock to see if people could bring in stuff that would help them during the winter.
Back at the news desk, Sun Young writes and edits her own story, reviews the work of junior reporters, and prepares the paper for publication.
A story would be balanced if it has all the parts that it needs, such as who, what, when, where, and how. And I look for the effect it has on students or how it's related to school.
Journalism 1 teacher Dana Benfield has high expectations for her student reporters and editors. If she wears the hat of publisher, the school principal plays owner, giving Dana Benfield and her newspaper staff an opportunity to monitor their own stories and editorials.
You don't want a word that's hyphenated. So take employee and bump it down one line right there. I think it should still stay within that text box. I think that if a student has an article that they really feel ethically could perhaps present some problems, I want to know exactly what their focus is going to be and what intention do they have when they write that article, what response are they looking for in the reader. If they're looking for a response that's immature and pokes fun at somebody, then it's not a valid article.
At the Bruin Times, just like the New York Times, it's all the news fit to print.
We have some callers waiting to talk to you.
Great.
The first waiting is Scott. Scott, what's your question for Mr. Clements today?
Why did you want to be a picture book author more than a chapter book author?
Well, Scott, I really just started off working on picture books because I was working for a company that published picture books. And one day the boss came in and said, we have an illustrator, a wonderful illustrator, and she'd like to write a story about something that happens underwater. And that book turned into Big Al. He said, would you like to try to write that story? And I said, yeah, I'd be happy to give it a try. So it was kind of just, that was the first real writing job I had, was writing picture books.
Thanks, Scott. We have another caller in. This is from Rachel. Rachel, what's your question today?
How come you chose a cat to be a character in Temple Cat?
I had a little trouble hearing that. How come I put the cat in the temple in Temple Cat?
No, how come you chose a cat to be a character in Temple Cat?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. I had found out from my own reading, just a little research I'd done, that in some ancient societies they actually worshipped cats as though they were a god. And that's what led me to use that character. Because, of course, a cat is always just a cat. It's never going to be more than a cat. It's not a god. So I thought, well, let's make that cat. Let's try and see what this would be like for the cat. And that's really where that story got started from.
Thanks, Rachel. Jacqueline, what is your question today for Mr. Clements?
Do you have a role model, and if so, who?
Do I have a role model? I think I have a lot of role models. I think my first role models were really my parents, who worked very hard, who loved books and reading and writing. I had some very good teachers when I was in high school and all through my school years I had good teachers, and they became role models. In fact, I brought along a copy of Double Trouble in Walla Walla. I dedicated this book to my high school English teacher, who was the first person who ever looked at something I had written and said, this should be published. And I mention her name in this book. So I've had some really wonderful role models. Parents, teachers, friends, my wife, my best friend who's my wife. She's a role model for me too.
Thanks, Jacqueline. We have a question from Ashley. Hi, Ashley.
Hi. Hi.
What is your question today?
I wanted to know, how many books have you made so far?
How many books have I made so far? Gosh, I think it probably has to be more than 50. Some of the books you can buy in bookstores, and some of the books are books that I've written for companies that make textbooks, like reading textbooks. So if you add all those up, it's probably a number that's bigger than 50. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Feels like a lot to me, too.
Thank you. We have a call in from Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. What's your question?
What new book will you read?
Jeremy, could you repeat that question?
What new book will you read? What will you write?
What new book will I write? Well, the book that will be coming out next year, I can show you what it looks like right now. Right now, it's just a whole bunch of words on cheap paper. This is the next book. It's a book called The School Story, and it's about two friends who live in New York City, and one of them gets the idea for writing a book, and the other one thinks, let's try to get it published.
Thanks, Jeremy. Briefly, what is your best advice to your viewers on the writing process?
The best advice for writing is, first of all, read, and secondly, when you begin writing, take the time to put in enough details. It's the details that make writing feel like it's real, that makes you feel like you're actually there with the people at the place.
Thank you. If you would like to send a letter to Mr. Clements or learn more about his books, contact Simon & Schuster Children's Publishing at 1230 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020. If you have questions about this broadcast, call us at 1-800-233-3277. Again, Andrew, thanks so much for visiting with us today. It's been a real pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. This has been great.
For the Fairfax Network, I'm Della Kidd. Keep reading, keep writing, keep dreaming.